The neck. The neck is the area that lies between the mandible above and clavicle and suprasternal notch below. All this neck. The neck, the skin of the neck supplied by cutaneous nerve. The skin over the trapezius muscle supplied by cutaneous nerve, posterior rami of the cervical nerve from the C2 to C5. The skin covers the trapezius muscle from the C2 to C5. C2, C3, 4, 5. Posterior rami. The largest part of the posterior rami of the cutaneous nerve, back of the largest nerve emerge from the posterior rami, greater occipital nerve, accompanied with artery, occipital artery. This nerve, cutaneous nerve, greater occipital nerve. Anterior rami give cutaneous nerve. Another cutaneous nerve, greater, lesser occipital nerve, greater occipital and lesser occipital nerve. Root of the lesser occipital nerve from the C2 arise behind the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Another nerve, greater auricular nerve. Root of the greater auricular nerve C2, C3. Another nerves, transverse cervical nerve, arise behind the sternocleidomastoid muscle and crossing the anterior triangle or sternocleidomastoid muscle, crossing إلها to supply the skin anterolateral of the neck. And greater auricular nerve supply skin angle of the mandible above parotid gland and surface of the auricle. Cutaneous nerves. Another nerves, supraclavicular nerve, above clavicle, supraclavicular nerve, divide into medial nerve, intermediate and lateral supraclavicular nerve. Root C3, C4. C3, C4. تمام. These cutaneous nerves. خلصت أنا من cutaneous nerve راح أجي على triangles of the neck. The neck divide into two triangles, anterior triangle and posterior triangle. The boundaries of the posterior triangles. Anteriorly by sternocleidomastoid muscle. Anteriorly. Posteriorly by trapezoid muscle. Inferiorly clavicle bone. Boundaries anteriorly sternocleidomastoid muscle, posteriorly trapezius muscle, inferiorly middle third of the clavicle. This anterior third, posterior third, middle third of the clavicle form boundaries of the posterior triangle. شوفوا مع العينة هاي posterior fibers of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, posterior fiber of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, anterior fiber of the trapezius muscle, and supraclavicular bone here absent. These boundaries of the posterior triangle. The posterior triangle will divide into two triangles by inferior belly of the omohyoid muscle. This triangle name largest triangle, occipital triangle, and smaller triangle above clavicle, supraclavicular triangle. This triangle divided by inferior belly of omohyoid muscle to occipital triangle and supraclavicular triangle. This supraclavicular triangle smaller and occipital triangle larger by omohyoid muscle. The content of these triangles. Occipital triangle contain semi-spinalis capitis muscle اللي هي نفسها هاي semi-spinalis capitis muscle and splenius capitis muscle, levator scapulae muscle, scalenus posterior muscle, and scalenus medius muscle. This muscle named scalenus anterior muscle. Muscles mentioned here: semi-spinalis capitis muscle. أبدي بالسمي بعدين أنزل على السبلينيوس capitis muscle, levator scapulae muscle, scalenus medius. هنا posterior absent because the trapezius muscle and levator scapulae صارت deep إلهن. And scalenus posterior, scalenus medius, scalenus anterior. These three scalenus muscle: scalenus anterior, scalenus medius, scalenus posterior, levator scapulae, splenius capitis muscle, semispinalis. The triangles structure crossing occipital triangles nerve. This nerve named supraclavicular nerve. Supraclavicular nerve. In the apex of the triangle artery, occipital artery. Supraclavicular triangle contains scalenus muscle, anterior and middle scalenus muscle, and arteries: suprascapular artery and superficial cervical artery branch from suprascapular artery and superficial cervical artery branch from the thyrocervical trunk, make a crossing to the supraclavicular triangle. The artery passing between scalenus anterior and scalenus medius, third part of the subclavian artery, and brachial plexus. The nerve lie anterior to the scalenus anterior muscle, phrenic nerve, supply diaphragm, root of the phrenic nerve C2, C4, C3, 4, 5, C3, 4, 5, mainly 4. أنا بهيج حالة خلصت البوستيريا triangles والcontent. أجي على الانتيريا triangle. Boundaries of the anterior triangle: anteriorly by midline, superiorly by the mandible, lower border of the mandible, and posteriorly by anterior fiber of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. This form anterior triangle. The anterior triangle will divide into another triangles by anterior belly of the omohyoid muscle and hyoid bone, form submental triangle, and posterior belly of digastric muscle and stylohyoid hyoid muscle form submandibular triangle or digastric triangle. These two triangles, submental triangle, boundaries by midline and mandible and anterior belly of the omohyoid muscle of the digastric muscle. Anterior belly of the digastric muscle. عافية عليك. Submental triangle and submandibular triangle formed by boundaries anteriorly by anterior belly of digastric muscle, inferiorly by two muscles, posterior belly of digastric muscle and stylohyoid muscle, superiorly by lower border of the mandible. This form submandibular triangle. Another triangles, muscular triangle, formed anteriorly by midline, superiorly by superior belly of the omohyoid muscle and inferiorly by or posteriorly by sternocleidomastoid muscle. This form muscular triangle. Triangle here name carotid triangle. Boundaries posteriorly by sternocleidomastoid muscle, inferiorly by superior belly of the omohyoid muscle, and superiorly by two muscles, posterior belly of the gastric muscle and stylohyoid muscle. This form carotid triangle. هاي الانفيرير belly of the omohyoid muscle حتى تجي تسوي لي البوستيرير triangle. أنا يهمني هسه الانتيرير triangles. أجي أشوفه على العينة. سميته هذا triangle قلت اسمه submental triangle boundaries by anterior belly of the gastric muscle. أول شيء الترينجل كله الانتيرير triangle anteriorly by midline, superiorly by lower border of the mandible and posteriorly by sternocleidomastoid muscle. Subdivision submental triangle boundaries by midline and posterior belly, anterior belly of digastric muscle and hyoid bone. This form submental triangle. Content of the submental triangle mylohyoid muscle. أشوف هنا عندي عضلة اسمها mylohyoid muscle. هاي العضلة mylohyoid muscle. أجي على ال digastric triangle أو submandibular triangle boundaries anteriorly by anterior belly of digastric muscle, posteriorly by two muscle, posterior belly of digastric muscle and stylohyoid muscle, superiorly by lower border of the mandible. This triangle name submandibular triangle or digastric triangle because lie between two bellies of digastric muscle. Content mylohyoid muscle and hyoglossus muscle and contain superficial part of the salivary gland and facial artery accompanied with facial vein, may be part from the parotid gland and contain on the posterior part of the submandibular triangle carotid sheath that contain internal carotid artery, internal jugular vein and vagus nerve. This content of the submandibular triangle in addition to submandibular salivary gland, most important. Another triangles here, muscular triangles. Boundaries anteriorly by midline, superiorly by superior belly of the omohyoid muscle and posteriorly by sternocleidomastoid muscle. The content of the muscular triangle, sternohyoid muscle from the sternum to the hyoid bone, sternohyoid and sternothyroid muscle from the sternum to the thyroid gland, lamina of the thyroid gland, named sternothyroid. And maybe see here thyroid muscle. إذا أنزل شوية ديب للمسلز infrahyoid muscle ألقى أيضا in the content of the triangle, muscular triangle, thyroid gland. Deep to the thyroid gland, trachea. Deep to the trachea, esophagus, and other structures. Carotid triangles, boundaries by superior belly of the omohyoid muscle, anteriorly, posteriorly by sternocleidomastoid muscle, anterior fiber of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, superiorly by two muscles, digastric muscle, posterior belly, and stylohyoid muscle, or greater horn of the hyoid bone. The content of the carotid triangles, carotid sheath. In this triangle, the common carotid artery divides into external and internal carotid artery. هنا راح أشوف external carotid artery. Give first branch superior thyroid artery and superior laryngeal artery. Superior laryngeal artery branch from the superior thyroid artery. These main content of the carotid triangles. بهاي الحالة أنا خلصت الانتيرير and posterior triangles. هنا راح أشوف عندي هاي عضلة cut section from the sternum to the hyoid bone, sternohyoid muscle. Deep إلها sternothyroid on the oblique line of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage. Sternothyroid from the sternum to the thyroid gland, and thyrohyoid, the nerve supply of the thyrohyoid muscle C1, the nerve supply of the sternohyoid and sternothyroid and omohyoid muscle ansa cervicalis, root of the ansa cervicalis C1, 2, 3. The carotid sheath contain common carotid artery and internal jugular vein and vagus nerve. This artery named superior thyroid artery branch from the external carotid artery and give in superior laryngeal artery. The nerve accompanied with artery, this nerve name internal laryngeal nerve branch from the superior laryngeal nerve. Superior laryngeal nerve branch from the vagus nerve. Superior laryngeal nerve give internal laryngeal nerve and external to muscle, cricothyroid muscle, and internal to sublime mucosa, sensory mucosa in the larynx. This nerve name descending branch of the hypoglossal nerve that form ansa cervicalis. Carry fibers from the C1 to supply thyrohyoid muscle, and another fibers shear to form ansa cervicalis with the descending branch of the cervical nerve اللي هي C2 C3 حتى يشتركون يسوون لي ansa cervicalis. هذا النيرف this nerve lie anterior to the scalenus muscle. سميناه قبل شوية، راجع الفيديو دكتور وتذكر اسمه، ما راح أقول لك، وإذا عرفته شكرا لك أنت مركز. هاي البريكيال بلكسس، وهنا عندي السيرفايكال بلكسس اللي سوتها الانتير ريماي of the cervical nerves.